Hello, welcome everyone to the IFIP 2021 Founders Retreat. I invite you to please turn on your cameras as we enter this virtual community space with open hearts and open minds, and to join us in a traditional opening ceremony. We have invited Teresa Zapeta, who is an Maya Indigenous woman from Guatemala. She is the Executive Director of the International Indigenous Women's Forum, known as FIMI, to do the invocation for us. So with that, Teresa, thank you for joining us, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Lourdes, and nice to see you again. And thank you for this invitation. Good evening and good morning, everyone. In this moment, I want to offer a candle. I'm here. I want to offer this candle to each of you, especially for your energies, for your presence, and of course for your work and commitment. And I think it's a good moment because in the Mayan calendar today is the name today is Bat. Bat, the meaning is networking and weaving. And I think it's a good moment, a good energy for this conference. And for that, I want to offer also this light to IFIP energy, and of course for all the team of IFIP team. I want to invite you to connect with this light and to connect with the energy our ancestors. It's important to remember their work and to remember their commitment. Maybe they are not physical with us, but their presence, their energy to accompany us in all our process. And that is why we invoke the energy of our ancestors that connect us with the past, with our present, and with our future. We also offer this candle for this conference, all our energy, because we want to have this space with harmony and to take this opportunity to continue working together. And for you, for your energy, and offer this candle. Thank you, Lourdes.
Thank you, Teresa, for your kind words and for really helping us start these 3 days that we have together by grounding us, by reminding us as to why we're here, why are we doing this work, and how do we do this in a collaborative way together with each other and with others. Let me now do the official welcome to the IFIP Founders Retreat. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Lourdes Singa. I'm Quechua descent from Peru and Executive Director of IFIP. I joined today from the ancestral lands of the Maidu and Nisenan peoples here in Northern California. So on behalf of IFIP, it is my pleasure again to welcome you to the 3-day retreat. As you've probably seen from the agenda, the theme of the retreat is moving forward together as a community. We're really picking up the conversation from when we left it off last year, where we ended, how do we do this work in community? And we're going to be diving deeper into those conversations throughout the time that we're together. But before we start the agenda of the day of the program, I want to take an opportunity to thank the wonderful planning committee of the Funders Retreat. I want to honor the time, the ideas, the suggestions, and the good spirit that the IFIP members, Kim Langbecker of Sacred Fire Foundation, IFIP member Chris Nozawa of Samdana Institute, Nitaya Sambod of True Cost Initiative, and Salote Soko of Unitarian Universalist Committee brought into the conceptualization and the design of how we could embark in this sort of process of in dialogue and discussion with all of you. I also thank the role of the board, the program committee of the board. We have one of our board members, who you'll be hearing from him in a little bit, but I also want to thank them for their input into that design of the agenda. I think together, your partnership, your openness and trust to try something new, and your ability to see the vision of what IFIP wanted to accomplish with this retreat, it's going to allow us to kind of go into deeper conversations. So I want to invite you to take opportunity to use this space to really provide, share input, dream together, and come out on the third day with commitments on how we can actually do this together. I also want to take a moment to thank my warm gratitude to Lauren Ellen McCann of Build With, who's not here with us today. She wasn't able to join us for the retreat, but she was also a core team person to Anka Matthew of La Sobremesa, who is here with us and who is going to be facilitating the convening over the next day. Anka, you'll hear more as I introduce Anka a little bit later, but she has been partnering with IFIP to make this virtual event a participatory experience. Like with any other conference and event, it takes many people to put an event in person as well as virtually. So thank you to the team of DCA Virtual for their assistance and providing logistical and admin support, to the language interpreters, as well as to the team and All Hands in Motion, who are providing text transcription services to make this an inclusive convening. Now, a special and deep gratitude to the IFIP board. Your leadership and your commitment to IFIP is like no other. You bring a lot of wisdom and dedication to the way that you like to kind of see IFIP going and stepping into different roles into the future. I thank you for your guidance and the aspirations that you bring, and the trust in the team and the IFIP team. All of those make it possible for us to realize our strategic objectives, to try new things, to take risks, and to take bold steps, all which are very necessary in this moment in time to shape how philanthropy partners and supports Indigenous peoples. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce you to IFIP board member Manaya King. Manaya is Maori, and he is the chair of the J.R. Mackenzie Trust Board and chairman of the Te Kawai Toro, the Trust Maori's Development Committee. He was appointed to the board in 2012 as the New Zealand Law Society representative and was deputy chairman of the board in 2013. Manaya is a lawyer who specializes in public health, and he is currently with the New Zealand Ministry of Health, and it is responsible for accountable for annual budgets, and as well as very much engaged in how both in philanthropy, but also in how government engages and supports our self-determined development. With that, I welcome you, Manaya, to take the floor.
Well, tēnā koe, Lourdes, and thank you for that opening remarks. I've actually now moved on from that health ministry and now with the Ministry of Social Development here in New Zealand, working on supporting Indigenous communities and their resilience with the COVID response. So always focused on that important kaupapa or what we call focus area. So thank you, Lourdes, for your introduction, and also just want to acknowledge you, Teresa, for your invocation and for binding our energies together as we come together to share knowledge, share information, share our aspirations and dreams for how we might enhance the philanthropic sector for the benefit and value for Indigenous communities globally. So kia ora ana, tātou katoa ngā mihi, mahana kia koutou katoa. So hello and warm greetings to you all the way here from Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's my pleasure to open up this Global and Virtual Funders Retreat Track B session on behalf of the board of IFIP. As you know, the aim of the retreat is to provide a collaborative and interactive space for IFIP members such as yourselves and invited funders to develop a roadmap of tangible steps leading toward an ideal future of Indigenous philanthropy. Here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, the philanthropic sector has been exploring how we can achieve greater impact, which is essentially our roadmap. As the chairperson of Aotearoa, New Zealand's oldest family foundation, the J.R. Mackenzie Trust, which is not an Indigenous-led organisation, but one that does focus on Indigenous development, myself, along with the board, have commissioned a series of reports to better understand how we can achieve long-term generational impact and what steps we need to take as a philanthropic sector in order to get to that place. What we distilled are 5 common themes or ideas which I believe are relevant for all of us here today and for the entire philanthropic sector. The first theme, and which will be very familiar to all of you, is to focus on equity. As organizations, we are increasingly shaping our investment and non-funding activities around equity. And this includes things like ensuring that our investments and our grants are addressing and not worsening key indicators of disparity. We're having to prioritize populations and groups on the basis of addressing inequalities, empowering marginalized communities to lead change and to ensure that our own organizations are diverse and inclusive. The second theme that we found when looking within the New Zealand context was there needed to be power sharing. So understanding where power lies and how power is used is a growing concern in philanthropy. Funders are increasingly recognizing the power they hold, both in terms of resources and in terms of their institutional voice and power to influence. Finding ways to exert this power in ways that influence broader changes that help shift power back to Indigenous communities and peoples are key practice considerations for funders. So funders are increasingly thinking about how they can activate and their collective power of their philanthropic peers through collaboration and empower communities through investment, capacity building, advocacy and valuing Indigenous practices, and sharing with communities, particularly Indigenous and marginalized communities, through new models of leadership, governance, decision-making, and grant-making. The third insight that we gained was that there needed to be focus on system change. So philanthropic organizations are increasingly needing to invest into achieving systems change, i.e. shifting the underlying conditions that hold an issue or problem in place. The intention is to turn off the tap and address issues at their source. When engaging in systems change, philanthropic funders need to focus on key levers of change that include government and institutional policies, the practices of actors within that system, such as people, organizations, networks, the distribution of power and resources, relationships and connections across that system, and also trying to break down mental models or deeply held ways of working that are holding systems back. As a key part of the system, the onus is on us as funders to work collaboratively with others, whilst also working on our own internal practices. A dominant theme in particularly countries like New Zealand, Aotearoa, is the theme around decolonizing practice. So in Aotearoa, New Zealand, and this would be seen globally, there's growing recognition of the importance of addressing colonial practices and their impact on the intergenerational well-being of Indigenous peoples. Philanthropy is increasingly prioritizing investment in outcomes for Indigenous peoples in issue areas where there is evidence of Indigenous peoples' overrepresentation and indicators of inequality. Importantly, philanthropy is also needing to move more deeply into understanding opportunities to decolonize its own institutions and practices, and we're seeing more of this. These include things like building relationships and mandates to work with Indigenous communities, growing the cultural competency of boards and staff, redesigning funding policies and processes so that they work more effectively for Indigenous communities, practicing more adaptive grant making that better responds to Indigenous ways of working, valuing Indigenous knowledge, practices and ways of knowing, and sharing decision-making power with Indigenous communities in ways that enable sovereignty and self-determination. The final theme that we have discovered is this idea about adaptability and learning, that for philanthropic organizations, then through their focus on equity and systems change, they need to also be increasing their diversity and complexity. And to respond to that complexity, funders need to be increasing their range of tools in their toolkit. So adaptive philanthropy requires us to be responsive and make rapid decisions when needed, invest in ways that are fit for purpose to the issue, opportunity, or community need, work relationally, and particularly with Indigenous communities and people, and absolutely trust that they know what it is that they need to deliver on their message and achieve their aspirations, and be willing to provide unrestricted funding and support. And finally, we need to prioritize learning at every opportunity to support adaptation and increase long-term impact for Indigenous communities and people. During this retreat and today, I encourage everyone here on behalf of the board to consider how these important ideas that I've just spoken about can be woven into your work, into your strategies, into your grant-making models, into governance practices and relationships with Indigenous communities and people. And also how might we influence others outside of this circle that we have to also consider these things as well. So to help keep that question, keep that in consideration at the forefront of your mind, I've come up with 2 key questions to consider as you collaborate throughout this virtual retreat. The first question is, does your organization or organizations that you partner with reflect the communities that you serve? And how might you in leadership and decision-making roles? The other question is, how is philanthropic practice experienced in the context of Indigenous peoples? And how can you build relationships, enable, share learning, and share power with Indigenous peoples more effectively? So as you reflect on these questions, continue to think about these global to the organizations that we represent for impact for Indigenous peoples globally. And so that's the challenge that I leave with you on behalf of the board as you enter into your discussions over the next few days. Again, thank you, Lourdes, for inviting me to open up this track. And thank you, Teresa, and thank you all those who have accepted the invitation to be part of today's conversations and the next couple of days. I do wish you all good luck in your conversations and hope that you enjoy this funders retreat and the many more opportunities that IFIP will support over the coming years to bring us together as a global community. So nō reira, ngā manuhiri, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā rā tātou katoa. Thank you. Back to you, Lourdes.
Thank you, Manaya, for those on-point comments. It reflects many of the conversations we held last year, as well as the intentions for the conversations we like to have at this retreat. They're fantastic. I think relationship matters, thinking about how do we shift our practices matters, and that practices has to also include making room for Indigenous leadership in philanthropy practices. It's not just about changing how an application, the questions on our application, but it's also going deeper and making room or emptying a seat so an Indigenous person can take that seat and be at the table together with all of you. Thank you so much for the opening. Now I'm gonna share my screen. And just give me a moment to do that. And if someone could let me know on the team that I have the right, that I'm sharing the right screen. Yes, thank you. Wonderful. All right, so I want to take an opportunity to also thank our members. Thank our members that are here, that are making and really making that decision to join us today. For our funders, for our Indigenous partners and friends, thank you so much for joining us today. I think what we just heard from Manaya, and it is very much what I wanted to say, but in your actions, in your influencing, in your advocacy, in your expressions of solidarity, and definitely in your grant making, you have the power and the ability to make change, to bring change into philanthropy, to create those necessary spaces that will invite and allow Indigenous organizations, Indigenous peoples to come into this sector. We know this sector is not the easiest sector, and we need more allies to open doors and open conversations. Without you as members and funders and Indigenous partners and friends, without you, IFIP would not be able to do what it does, and would not be in a position either to celebrate our accomplishments and to keep also each other, to keep us at IFIP, and to also keep each other accountable, both within the philanthropic sector, but also accountable to Indigenous peoples and Indigenous peoples movement. Now, we know that hosting a convening, a conference or a retreat would not be able to happen if we didn't have a number of people, and I'm referring now to our wonderful IFIP team behind the vision, the idea, and the commitment. So I want to take a moment to also honor the IFIP team. And I'll take a moment to introduce, for those of you who don't know all the team members, I want to take just a moment to honor each one of them. And I'll start with Rachel Smith, who joined IFIP in August 2019 as a program coordinator of the Indigenous Territories Working Group. And then followed by Winnie Cody, who joined us last September, just about as IFIP and Rachel and I were pivoting into our first virtual ever conference. Winnie joined IFIP as the Membership and Communications Coordinator. Now, more recently this year, we have welcomed two new staff members. Cualnesca Tonantzin Miranda, who joined us just as recently as August as the Operations Associate at IFIP. And last but not least, Chanda Tapa, who just joined us about a little over a month ago now as the first ever program director at IFIP. Together with the team, we are excited about not only bringing you a rich experience into the virtual Funders Retreat, but also as a young team, as you're seeing, still a young team, we have many dreams, many ways in which we want to carry the work and ideas that we want to start kind of implementing going into the future. Now, some of you who are here with us today are new to IFIP, may not know of our work. So I want to just take a moment, a little bit about talking about who we are. IFIP has been around for now 21 years. But more recently, looking back in the last 5 years, we've gone through this trajectory from transition to now growth. And we have gone through this process in 2017 as a major organizational transition, which also led to my joining IFIP as executive director in 2017, the adoption of a new strategic framework, which brought really kind of big ideas on how we can continue to do this work, both within the US, but also expanding, as we call the sphere of influence, into other philanthropic spaces. 2018, we saw a little bit of sort of still the effects of the transition, but we went ahead and started launching programs, really moving forward with implementation of the framework. We launched two working groups, one on the indigenous territories, a second group focus on indigenous women. We also introduced a learning institute to continue to build capacity of funders, and then also hosted our first and the first ever, as far as I know, the first ever gathering of indigenous-led funds. Throughout 2017 and 2018, we also focused on really strengthening the organization from the financial system to the operational system. And then I start moving into this phase of, really kind of doing more of the strategy implementation, the rolling of new programs, re-energizing both membership and re-energizing how we work in partnership with other peer funder networks. Again, we saw the second gathering of indigenous-led funds, and right after that second gathering, it was very clear that work would start taking more of a prominent role in within the objectives of IFIP. We launched a working group, and we welcome a new program coordinator, Rachel, continue to focus on the strengthening of the organization. And going into 2020 and 2021, well, we know what happened in 2020. IFIP had big plans on celebrating our 20th anniversary for a number of events, but we had to quickly shift and adapt and respond to the moment. And nevertheless, we were excited by the partnership that we had with Alliance Magazine in publishing for the first time ever a special feature dedicated of Indigenous philanthropy. In fact, I think Manaya King played a key role here because he was the co-guest editor of the special feature. The board asked to commission a midterm report, a midterm evaluation of our strategic framework to see the progress that we were making or not making from the strategic framework. We learned that we had made progress in many fronts, but we still needed to kind of think about investing in the organization, as well as thinking about this question about growth and then thinking about the programmatic work between how do we do this between death and breath. We also welcome Winnie Cody as a membership and communications coordinator. Now we're ending 2021 with another great year for IFIP. We've been very much following a lot of the global events, and for those of you who are in Australia, a part of what we do at IFIP is also follow some of these global events that have potential of impacting Indigenous peoples in the different regions of the world. So we've been following, for instance, what has happened on the topic of women through the Generation Equality Forum that happened earlier this year, the UN food systems, and more recently the climate COP. And really is to pay attention to what the Indigenous movement, Indigenous organizations who are going into these global spaces are saying, what are they advocating for, and then feeding that information back to philanthropy in various ways. I'm excited that we're going to be also ending the year with 2 new team members. And we have, like I said, some plans for next year, but you'll have to tune in on day 3 to hear about our plans and to hear the ideas that we have on how we continue to do this work. Now, as we enter this retreat space, I just want to maybe take a pause and invite you to, again, think about the 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy, which IFIP asks our members to practice. And this is an invitation to also think about these 4 values of Indigenous philanthropy as a way that we can also practice and model throughout the 3 days of the retreat. We can enter this space sharing sort of responsibility for how we're going to continue to do the work together. We know that we all bring different ideas and into this space, or respect for an openness also to listen to different ideas and new ideas. Relationships, when I attach on relationships, is key to doing this work. Please take opportunity of the platform, connect. There's more different ways to connect with each other. We know virtual space are not the ideal space in which we want to do some of this work, but there are ways that you can connect and start meeting people by using some of the functions of the platform. And the last one is reciprocity. I think it's just key here is embracing the idea that we all have an opportunity to give and also an opportunity to receive. So be open to those, all those different values. The last one I would say is that as we enter this and as we engage in these conversations, keep an open mind for learning and unlearning. We all go through the process of sometimes assuming that we know, but we don't know what we don't know, right? And so just practice that a space of learning and unlearning. Sorry about this slide. It has a mind of its own, and it's not letting me move to where I want to go. So in the process of registration, if you guys were paying attention to what we were putting on the registration, we were invited to look at the report of last year's funders retreat, funders convening. If you didn't get a chance, you still have a chance to just kind of read over, because the conversations that happened last year are very much conversations that we are intent to continue and to go a little deeper. We have moved away from offering keynotes or offering panel sessions because we wanted to create more space for discussion, dialogue. And as you can see here from the graphic recordings, there's a lot of conversations, and particularly, this is from track B, actually, as a matter of fact, about Indigenous leadership in philanthropy, making space for Indigenous peoples. And I would just add, it's not only about making space, but sometimes it's giving up your seat so someone else can come into the conversation and be part of the decision making. But we also talked about the building the capacity of funders to do the decolonized work. And what does that look like? Why is so important? Why is so central to some of the actions, some of the things that we can think about in how we bring and start changing how our own institutions look at this work. Where we're going to be centering the conversation is sort of, if you're looking at the image, which is in the middle of that graphic, it's what steps will you take? Those were one of the questions that was asked last year. And this is exactly what we're going to be it's so necessary that as we build on last year's convening, that we take time to think about how are we actually going to do this work? So the first 2 days are designed to have these conversations and dialogue, building up to day 3, where we're inviting you back to, into the program with a readiness for thinking about how you or your organization is going to commit to make a transformative change within your institution or within philanthropy. And we're going to do this by bringing the Minca style of working. Minca is a Quechua word, and it's a form of working in the Andean region where a community comes together around a community project that is going to benefit all. And this is really the philosophy that we're bringing into this space. Now, I want to just, before I hand it over to Anka, sorry, my slides. Again, I keep on referring that we're building into last year's conversation. The way that we thought about the topics of discussion, the way we design this process are really being informed by what we heard last year and what our planning committee, the feedback and the suggestions that were offered in that process. But as you can see from the survey results of last year, all of you, those who were part of the share, what are some of the topics? How do we need to continue? How do we take these lessons and influence the donor community? And that's exactly what we're trying to do in this space. People wanted to hear more about how do we include Indigenous representatives with disabilities, continue to support Indigenous in philanthropy. So all these conversations are now part of the dialogues that we're going to be hosting, and we start shortly with the community dialogues that both Jennifer Towley and Christine Osawa are going to be sharing with us. So let me stop sharing my screen. And now I'd like to invite Anka to join me on the spotlight so that I can introduce Anka. Anka Matiok is the founder and director of La Sobremesa, a consultancy that specializes in design and facilitation process of transformation that strengthens the civil society ecosystem. She was born in Romania, but has passed through the United States, Chile, and is now based in Mexico. Over the past 10 years, ANCA has supported and worked with dozens of civil society organizations and networks with a focus on Latin America and as well as a focus on transparency, anti-corruption, and working with human rights actors. ANCA, you have the floor to lead us into the next part of the program.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Lourdes. Thank you, Lourdes, not only for the introduction, but for leading us through up until now and all of the work that's been put into this. Thank you also, I wanted to say thank you to Teresa for joining us and doing a wonderful invocation today. We're definitely bringing that energy and that light here in track B, so thank you. And thank you also to Manaya for setting the stage and really putting forth challenges that, as you guys will see in a few minutes, are really deeply embedded into what we're going to be talking about over these next 3 days. So I'm Anca, again, as Lourdes said, from La Sobremesa. I'll be one of your facilitators over the next 3 days of retreat. And it was through La Sobremesa and through some work that I did with Wings, where I met Lourdes, and she invited my team and I, along with Laura and Ellen, to come and really try to create this vision that she and the team had of creating a more participatory space for the IFIP community, for you all. So she wanted to create the participatory space in order to move forward collectively. And that's exactly what we're going to start doing here today. So again, welcome to the IFIP Funder Retreat, moving forward as a community. What I want to do before we jump in feet first is walk you guys through the agenda and kind of see the arc that we've designed together, that we've co-designed with the IFIP team through an extensive process. So first, we are here in day 1. And really the core question that we're going to grapple with is, how did we get here? Right? So looking past at this past year, if you're new to the IFIP community or if you've been part of the IFIP community, what has this past year or years looked like, right? In this past year, of course, we have the theme of Breakout 1 that's very represented, which is the impact of COVID and the response from Indigenous communities. That's going to be one of the ways that we're going to grapple with this question of how did we get here? The other breakout session that's going to be happening simultaneously, and yes, unfortunately, you have to choose between the two, is Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change, right? Especially at this moment right after the COP. So we're really wanting to set the stage by reflecting back on how we got here, how we got to present day. And then in day 2, tomorrow, we're going to start thinking about where are we today? Where are we currently? And what do we want and need as the IFIP community, as members of the IFIP community? And in day 2, we're going to have 3 breakout sessions in parallel, where again, we're grappling with this question in different ways. So the first question is, what does solidarity look like for us in addressing the continued impact of racism and colonization on Indigenous peoples globally today? The breakout 4 is going to talk about ensuring effective and meaningful representation of intersectional groups with Indigenous communities. And breakout 5 is going to be about moving forward, decolonizing philanthropy. Where are we and what's needed? And again, you guys will probably hear a little bit about what Manaya was referring to, and also what Lourdes just shared with us. That was a continuation from your conversations of last year. And then finally, we're going to end on day 3, thinking about the future, thinking about where are we going and how will we get there collectively, right? So here we're going to start thinking about what are our commitments as individuals, within our organizations, as organizations, and within the IFIP community. What are we going to commit to moving forward? What does that roadmap look like? So again, here we see 3 breakouts and 3 different ways that we're going to sink our teeth into this question. So first we have a breakout on Indigenous-led funds, roles and lessons of philanthropy and their commitments. We have collaboration to extend support to Indigenous communities and smaller organizations. And then finally, we have a breakout on funder accountability to the communities they claim to be serving and supporting. So taking a step back and looking here, we see this arch of, this is where we were maybe last year or the years before. How did we get here? Tomorrow, we're going to be looking at where are we today, currently, and what is it that we want? And then that's going to set up for the conversations around, okay, this is what we want. So how are we going to make that happen in the future? In Minca style discussions, as Lourdes was saying, in collective working groups together. So that is the arc that we co-designed and the questions that will lead us through it. And now I want to call your attention, but I think everyone is aware, we've mentioned it a few times, that there are 2 tracks that are happening in this event. So we just finished an excellent track A with all of your colleagues from the Americas and a few from Europe and from Africa. And you all are in track B, the excited track. Thank you all for being here. It's really great to be able to see hopefully the ways that the conversations will be joined, and also the differences amongst everyone. We're going to attempt to join as much as possible. We have a buddy system that I think some of you have signed up for, if I'm not wrong. And with this buddy system, what we're trying to do is bridge the gap or bridge the time zone divide. And we're setting people up from track B with people from track A, so you guys can communicate together throughout the conference and who knows, potentially beyond. We also will be showing you recordings of what is being discussed in track A. So that will happen right before we go into breakouts today. You're going to hear a little bit about what track A discussed. And also track A will hear about what you discussed. So tomorrow morning, that's how we'll open it up for track A. So there will be hopefully a little bit of convergence of the 2. So that is the tracks. And also just to note, of course, everyone is invited to track A as well. If you are sleeping or very busy and can't make it, no worries. All of the, for both tracks, all of the sessions are recorded. So you'll have that available to you in SwapCard. Speaking of which, I wanted to take you all through SwapCard, which I think congratulations, most of you got here through SwapCard. I know for me, it's a new tool and it's always a little bit wonky at first, but I wanted to take your attention to the menu and all of the options that you have here, and then we'll quickly go to SwapCard. So you see that in SwapCard, once you're in the retreat, you have the options of looking at the agenda, the list of attendees, the speakers and facilitators, partners and service providers, a live help desk, and a frequently asked questions. And I wanted to draw your attention specifically to the agenda first, because there's a lot of really amazing information in there that I think can easily go unnoticed. So if we're in track B, let's go to track B. We have first a brief overview of the track of who is going to present, which community member is going to present, what the topic is, any other notes that are important to be aware of. And then this is possibly the most important piece, which is the link to the Zoom. Please click on that to join any conversation. And then as you can see here, there's a live discussion but I think possibly even more exciting, and I'll use myself as an example, is you can make connections with other folks in the conference. Again, not only from track B, but also potentially from track A. So you can see here that there is information about me. There are links to social media, contact information, etc. And you can also link to people who are not yourself through this amazing feature that SwapCard has, which is send a connection request. So Jennifer, hi, I'm going to send you a quick request. And now hopefully you will accept it and we will be connected. So you can do that throughout the 3 days. And as Lourdes was saying, we really do encourage you to do that. This is an amazing opportunity to, of course, be together, but it's virtual. We want you to make the most out of every opportunity in every virtual way. So that is the agenda. And then the other important piece here is the live help desk, which we have already been using a bit in track A. For those of you who were using SwapCard at last year's event, it functions the same way. It's basically one conversation. I have a new connection. It's basically one conversation where people from IFIP will be responding any of your questions. So if you have a question about anything, technical things about how to get into the Zoom, or where can you find the notes for this session, or whatever it may be, put it in the live help desk on the SwapCard and we will answer right away. All right. We will also, of course, be accepting questions through the Zoom chat. So feel free to put any questions on the Zoom chat. And also, if they are technical questions, feel free to reach out to the IFIP team also on Zoom. All right, so that was a little bit on SwapCard. And finally, before, let me just wrap things up here, bear with me a little bit more. I wanted to go over community agreements, which are of course important for any space. I think particularly for one where we're going to be having a lot of dialogue and conversation, as we will through these next 3 days in our breakouts. So these are the community agreements that IFIP and I really came up with together. You already heard from Lourdes about the very important 4 R's of Indigenous philanthropy. And these are really going to be leading us throughout the entire space, right? So come in with respect, responsibility, reciprocity, and relationships, building relationships and keeping them strong. Related to these 4 R's, we also have be present. So as much as you can, turn off or minimize at least distractions, and really try to tune into the conversation, right? It's a short amount of time that we're going to be together. We really want you to make the most of it. The classic take space, make space for those who talk often, like myself. I would encourage myself to perhaps take a back seat if I've already spoken a lot in my breakout session and ask my other colleagues what it is that they also think. Then there's be open to new ideas. As Lourdes was saying, there's a very diverse group with us on the call today, and they might have experiences different to yours. So definitely be open to not only hearing them, but really grappling with them in the breakout sessions. There is the yes and instead of the perhaps more common yes, but. So here we want to create a constructive space, and we encourage you all to do the same and to be part of that, embodying that right in the breakout sessions. So we want an and that brings in new experiences instead of negating them. And then finally, it's an oldie but a goodie. It's use I statements. So we want you to share from your own experience. Again, that's why we're all here. We want to hear about your own experiences. So use those I statements. And before I move on, I want to pause here and see if anyone has anything else to add. It can be other facilitators or people who have been in many Zoom calls, as I'm sure we all have, and add in a community agreement that really works for you all. I know from track A, we added, please speak slowly. for the translation, but also in general. So I hope I am embodying that as well. Anything else anyone would like to add, please add it to the Zoom chat. And also, just a note on these community agreements, we'll also be reading them before we go into every breakout session, and I'll be reminding us of them every day before we start on the work, the collective work. All right. So those are the community agreements. We are now stepping into what we are calling a morning huddle. So as Lourdes was saying before, Tanya, in any task with writing, people could write in their own preferred language. Oh, I love this question. And translations into English later. Is that okay? That is a great question, Tanya, and I'll take this into track A too. I would say a resounding yes, right? We want people to be comfortable writing in the language that they prefer to speak in. And yes, and that can be translated later, definitely. And also thank you to the IFIP community for bringing in the translations and the transcribers that are helping us with the note taking and the translating. So in the morning huddle, we'll start every day in a space where we all gather and listen to some community members present on the topics of discussion for our breakout sessions, right? So really to get the juices flowing before we head into breakout sessions. So I'll start by presenting again our core question or core theme of day one, which is how did we get here, right? So we'll do this in 3 ways. The first way is an interactive that we'll do in just a few minutes. It's an interactive where we're going to ask all of you to participate simultaneously in responding. What has happened since last year's convening? What have you all done individually within your organizations, perhaps within the IFIP community, that has furthered the conversations from last year's retreat, right? So what has happened since last year's convening? And then there's the 2 breakout sessions that I already mentioned that are going to be happening simultaneously. So one on the impact of COVID and response from Indigenous communities, and the other breakout session happening around Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change. And in order to introduce these breakout sessions and tell us a little bit more and get us into this headspace, I'm going to pass it back over to Lourdes to present us the community members.
Thank you, Anka. Let me introduce first Christy, who will be sharing with us the impact of COVID and responses from the Indigenous communities and learnings and reflections. If we can have Christy join me on the spotlight. Christy Nosawa serves as the Samdana Executive Director. Prior to joining Samdana, she was with the Regional Institute Capacity Building and Partnership Specialist of BirdLife International. Christy works with local NGOs and community partners to assist them in responding to local needs and develop not only skills and knowledge in conservation, but also in handling social issues affecting or possibly impacting areas of undercom management. Christy has held various roles that include senior advisory board member of the Foundation of the Philippine Environment. And today, Christy is engaged in advocacy for funding mechanisms based in and managed by the Global South, as well as community-based natural resources management, including the promotion of community conserved areas. She is currently involved in capacity building for indigenous national organizations in around Asia, and the promotion of local empowerment programs across Asia. Christy, I invite you to take the floor. You have about 8 to 9 minutes, 10 minutes to share. Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you, Teresa, for the energy and spirit you brought as we began this session. It is now raining as I speak, and I think this is a blessing. I'm still outside anyway. Blessing for us and for farmers across where the rain reaches. Thank you for the design of Track B, allowing us to do this at daytime. And thank you to La Sobremesa and the IFIP staff to enable us to do this. How did we get here? I guess with less carbon footprints, because we're all online. We haven't traveled, taken a bus or a plane or burned some carbon traveling, or maybe some of us have. But amidst the COVID protocols during this COVID-19 pandemic, so we are now entering into our we are now into our second year operating in this situation. So what were the lessons or challenges and opportunities, I think, that we learned from COVID-19? And when we entered COVID-19, we were surprised by the issue of hunger that actually was being experienced by some of our community partners. Considering that they are close to natural resources, then we thought that this should not be the case. But actually, they did. And this is because, primarily on reflection, many of them have been now engaged in single commodity value chains, therefore almost entirely dependent on one type of crop. And then this was aggravated by the drought that hit some of the communities, a co-impact of climate change in some of these communities, which rendered hunger an issue, immediate issue for some of them. So we had to respond to this as a grant-making organization, and we needed to respond to this quickly in a way that actually is sensitive to the considerations of indigenous peoples. Now, this spotlighted the vulnerabilities of indigenous peoples, the limited access to basic services, energy, communications, education, but also the dependency brought about by loss of indigenous food and health systems. A product of probably colonization, but probably also of development designs. So this has been, a reflection on this. It has become, there has also been increased incidences of gender violence in some communities, particularly for women and girls. And this also surprised us in the sense that it wasn't unheard of before, but it became very apparent in some communities, or it emerged in some of the communities where this wasn't happening. Overall, it was harder work for indigenous peoples to secure tenure. There was increased militarization. There was increased use of the COVID protocols to prevent mobility of everybody. It also emphasized the difference of the protocols to ordinary communities, but also vis-a-vis business. So business as usual for many big agribusinesses and those engaged in the extractive industries and big development projects. Sadly, this led also to the killing of some IP leaders. And before I move on to opportunities, I'd like to request a moment of silence for them. Now, Thank you very much. Now, opportunities. Teresa, thanks for the renewed energy, but I think this crisis also presents opportunities. It also provided renewed energies for us, considering that we were not busy zipping around or moving around, had a lot of time for reflection and moving back and healing. So the experience brought about renewed emphasis on the next generation. So young IP communities went back to their communities. They were forced not to be engaged in different activities, but in community activities. They were given the time to rediscover their heritage, work on forest restoration, work on farming, and emphasize the value of intergenerational learning. So the young generation were educating the leaders on how to use modern communications, internet-based communications, and the leaders were then going back to share cultural knowledge on food, health, farming, and other systems. Silipiten is a word that is used by the Tagbanoas in Calamianes Tagbanoas in the northern part of Palawan. These are island dwellers. Silipiten basically is about their food system. It spotlighted, I think, the role of women in community food and health systems, the value of indigenous knowledge and culture in similar crises as the one we're having now. It also brought forward innovations. It brought forward the need to go out and move to discover new allies, and mainly reflecting on the question on how do we move from a defensive position where we are also always in defense of the security of territories to an offensive to scale out, not necessarily scale up, to secure rights of indigenous peoples and local communities. And again, as I mentioned in our meeting before, this actually brought an opportunity for healing, the work on intersectionality and solidarity building. As a grant giving, we needed to be responsive not only to supporting partners meet their challenges, but also taking advantage of the opportunities. We needed to continue to provide flexible and inclusive grants. For example, trying to get money to Myanmar, which you all know has been very, very challenging. Enabling the enablers, we needed to continue to learn, unlearn, innovate, and reach out even in these times of crisis. Finally, at the recent UNFCCC, the young climate activists said, anything but blah, 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 as a slogan. And the challenge remains for us in translating words into action needed to shift the trends. So what do we do differently or more of to support power shifts and the ways to increase agency of indigenous communities around Southeast Asia initially, but globally as well, so that communities are truly resilient? That is the key question we face moving forward for Samdana, and I think many of our colleagues in IFIP. Thanks very much. Good morning.
Thank you, Christy. I think some of the messages that you just shared also were shared in the morning session as well. I think your last comment of agency of indigenous communities, how do we do this? Because we had a moment where, yes, many indigenous communities did and continue to have the impact of COVID, but also we saw, as you were sharing, Christy, going back to communities, the intergenerational learning, while at the same time in various parts of the world, including in the Amazon region, many of the elders and other indigenous people were have died because of COVID. Thank you for your words. Now, I'd like to invite Jennifer Towley Corpus to be on the spotlight with me. Jennifer will be talking on the topic of Indigenous rights and self-determination in this moment of climate change urgency. She's also just coming back from the COP26. But let me introduce her. Jennifer Towley is from the Kankane Igorot people of the Mountain Province in the Philippines. She's a lawyer by profession and is the global policy and advocacy lead for NIATERO. She's a former coordinator of the Indigenous Peoples' Rights and Policy Advocacy Program at TEPTEVA in the Philippines. TEPTEVA, Indigenous Peoples International Center for Policy, Research, and Education. Jennifer is passionate about the development capacities of the next generation of Indigenous leaders. She was the 2012 Indigenous Intellectual Property Fellow at the World Intellectual Property Organization, known as WIPO. She was also involved as negotiator and expert for the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, representing Indigenous peoples at the negotiations leading to the adoption of the Nagoya Protocol on Access and Benefit Sharing under the Convention of Biological Diversity. With that, I'd like to invite you to take the floor, Jennifer.
Thanks very much, Lourdes. And I really wish I was addressing you from my hometown, which you can see in my virtual background. But unfortunately, I am still stuck in Glasgow, where, as you know, COP26 just ended. And it's one of the biggest COPs ever. And I think although international meetings started with, big international meetings started after COVID with the Marseille IUCN Congress, the number there, 5,000 participants, is really nothing compared to the number that attended here at Glasgow, 52,000 registered participants, and a lot of carbon emissions associated. So yes, unfortunately, one in our party tested positive for COVID, and I had to stay behind to assist with the 10-day isolation. Okay, so having said that, again, thank you for this opportunity to share some insights coming from the results of COP26. As you know, there was a big sense of urgency going into this meeting. Many were saying that this is the last chance for us to act to keep global warming within 1.5 degrees. But equally publicized was the fact that although the UK pushed very hard for revised nationally determined contributions where countries make commitments for how much carbon they are going to cut at the national level, although the push was very hard, the analysis of the existing NDCs still do not bring us to 1.5. We are now on track for a 2.1 to 2.8 degree warming in the future. So it's the last chance. And unfortunately, the outcomes, the action are not, I would say, not sufficient to get us to where we need to be in the coming decade. So as Indigenous peoples, and I was part of the Indigenous Peoples Caucus here at the climate change negotiations, we went into the COP with certain objectives. And the 6 areas of work where we felt that Indigenous rights and self-determination should be reflected very strongly are in the increase in ambition towards a just transition. We also identified the discussions under Article 6, which is on international rules for the voluntary carbon markets, as an important space where Indigenous rights should be reflected. Agriculture is also an important space, loss and damage, climate finance, and the work of the local communities and indigenous peoples platform. So throughout the 2 weeks, we worked really hard, especially on Article 6, which was hotly negotiated at COP26. And we got good results on paper. So on the very first day of the COP, there was a World Leaders Summit, and there was an announcement of a pledge, a commitment of 1.7 billion for indigenous peoples, forests, and land tenure. There was also a pledge for zero deforestation by 2030. Unfortunately, the Philippines did not sign, but many other countries signed onto that commitment. So how did we do in terms of the results of our advocacy? The outcome document was, well, of course, I would have to say that there were a lot of indigenous participants at the COP. I think about more than 150. Not all had access to the venue because the badges were in severe shortage. Our African brothers and sisters had very minimal participation because of the difficulty with the visa. So a lot of them got their visas very late, and several, got them on the last day of the COP. So that was a huge challenge. Now on the outcomes, there was the cover decision, which is the general outcome document of the COP. And we were pleased to see that there was strong language in there around indigenous rights and the recognition of the role of indigenous peoples. There were at least 4 paragraphs from that cover decision that mentioned indigenous peoples, and it included exact replication of preambular paragraph 11 of the Paris Agreement, which talks about the need to respect human rights and indigenous people's rights in any climate action. One of the early decisions that was adopted was on the renewal of the mandate of the local communities and indigenous peoples platform, and support for the 3-year work plan, the second 3-year work plan on how to build awareness and capacity among scientists and policymakers, decision makers, on how to respect and tap into traditional knowledge of indigenous peoples. A seat was provided for indigenous peoples in this CTCN, a Center for Technology, Climate Technology Center and Network, and that was new. We never had a seat there in the past. Unfortunately, agriculture was kicked into the next COP, and loss and damage, a process was established, but no funds were committed. The bright spot for indigenous peoples is that there is an indigenous representative in the expert group on non-economic losses. And this is very important for indigenous peoples because beyond the economic losses of climate change, we also need to think about the losses to culture and our spiritual relations when our ecosystems and communities are damaged. So that is ongoing work. It was not concluded at this COP. Now for climate finance, and I'd like to end there, there are all of these pledges, but there is no clarity around how to get the money directly to indigenous peoples. So out of the 1.7 billion, about half is from the countries, the US, the UK, Norway, the Netherlands. And the mechanism so far is through their official development assistance, which is very inaccessible to indigenous peoples. There are philanthropic and other non-government organizations involved in the pledge. And one of the next steps that needs to take place is to elaborate the mechanisms. Is for indigenous peoples to be part of this process, to elaborate the mechanism of delivery to indigenous peoples. Other outstanding work includes development of a set of principles and policies around safeguards and respect for Indigenous rights and self-determination. And lastly, the work on developing a grievance mechanism for when things go wrong. And this closely parallels the discussion under Article 6. So one of the big achievements of the COP was an agreement on Article 6. And fortunately, all the Article 6 texts include Indigenous people's rights. There is also a process to establish an independent grievance mechanism. However, in the development of activities, Indigenous peoples need only be consulted in accordance with domestic arrangements. They weren't able to include the demand of Indigenous peoples for free prior informed consent. So in parallel, climate finance and this rules on the voluntary carbon market really requires vigilance from Indigenous peoples to make sure that the safeguards are in place, to make sure that the grievance mechanism is established, and to make sure that respect for Indigenous people's rights and self-determination is at the center of the implementation of all of these decisions. So I will stop there because I have run out of time, but I look forward to the discussion. Thanks, Lourdes.
Thank you, Jennifer, for sharing what was a very active COP for Indigenous peoples, Indigenous delegation that you all supported, were part of. For those of you who are not familiar with what has happened in terms of the leadership that Indigenous peoples play in all these conversations, there are ways that you can follow a lot of the presentations, and I'll put shortly a copy to the Indigenous Pavilion where you can watch all the on-demand presentations and video there. But I also want to put now on the chat for you, as it relates to the last comment, and it relates to philanthropy, but the last comment that Jennifer was bringing of the philanthropic commitments. There was the 1.7 billion as in share, as well as prior to the COP, a commitment of 5 billion from philanthropic actors. IFIP did put out a statement, which I just shared with you on the chat, on calling for accountability, which is exactly what I think we need to start doing more of, and calling for accountability because many, at least 5 IFIP members have been part of that 1.7 billion and the 5 billion commitment. But with that, I also want to just, I think now, thank both Christy and Jennifer for sharing. We're going to continue into the breakout where we can now dive deeper into the discussions on how we do this work together, and how we each play a role in kind of thinking about the questions that we have for the dialogues. I think I hand it back to you, Anka.
Yes, thank you, Lourdes, and thank you both, Jennifer and Christy. You're really getting us excited for the breakout conversations. And before we actually head into breakout, we're going to take a quick break for 10 minutes. But before the break, we're going to do that interactive that I mentioned a little bit ago. So as a reminder, today's theme is, how did we get here, right? We just heard about this from Jennifer and Christy in the context of both COVID-19 and also climate change, again, preparing us for the breakouts. But before we do that, I want to take us to the interactive so that we can all together answer the question of what has happened since last year's convening. So to do that, we're going to use a tool called Mural. It's another tool that maybe some of you are familiar with, maybe not. It's similar to a Google Jamboard or a Miro, where basically what it is it's a virtual whiteboard. So it is a whiteboard or a big white sheet of paper where you can put Post-it notes and draw and yeah, and collaboratively work together. So we're going to be using this Miro. And if some of the IFIP team members can put the link in the chat, that would be great. So the first step is getting into the Miro. So you're going to click that link. And once you click the link, you will be prompted to put your name in the pop-up box. You can put your name in there, or you can log in as an anonymous animal. They have a wide array of animals. So we have here already a visiting ladybug, a hippopotamus, a visiting rhino. You're all with us. Welcome to the Miro. So once you're in the Miro, I'm going to take you through step by step, and I'll repeat the instructions. If you do have questions, those please do that. Leave them in the Zoom chat. So once you're in the Miro, again, you click the link, and then you opt to put your name in, or you enter as an anonymous animal. I'm going to tell you about the secrets of how to use Miro. So first thing is how to zoom within the Miro. So how to basically navigate, right? So if you can all see my cursor, wherever you put your cursor, that is where it's going to zoom. And the zoom motion is just expanding your fingers like this, right? So if you're seeing me on the video, expanding the fingers. So I'm going to expand my fingers on my trackpad, on my mouse pad, and I'm zoomed right into here, the question that we're going to answer for day one. What has happened since last year's convening? So you can zoom in and you can zoom out, again, just with this motion if you have a trackpad. If it's with a mouse, it's slightly different. And it's a scroll. It's a hold and scroll motion. And there is one other way that is universal for everyone, and it's this little zoom setting down here. So this is where you can zoom in and scroll up and zoom out and scroll. So that is the navigation of Zoom. I'll go over that again in a second. And then the second, the most important thing that we'll be doing here is actually using the Post-it notes. So I see some of you have created Post-it notes. That's great. So there's some Post-it notes that I've already created for you. Selecting the Post-it notes, you just click on it and you should be able to write right in here. I see some people writing in here. And what we want you to write, as you see with your colleagues from track A, you can take a sneak peek at what they've written, is the answer for you to this question of what has happened since last year's convening? What have you and or your organization done from the conversations last year, right? So some examples that the IFIP team put were advancing rights in your portfolio, supporting Indigenous priorities, granting money directly to Indigenous communities, and supporting Indigenous rights and self-determination. So I'm going to give you guys a few minutes to click on a Post-it and then answer this question. One answer per Post-it. And also, if you can put in parentheses your name so that other people who see your Post-it can contact you on SwapCard and can continue the conversation. From track A or track B. So I'll give us a few minutes to start answering. And any questions, I'll be looking at the Zoom chat. So please feel free to put them in there. And of course, if you have achieved more than one thing that you're proud of, list them all out. You can use as many post-its as you like. Cultural competency trainings. We have a few that's marked here. Building an Indigenous-led model of granting. Amazing, from Nile. Internal things like time for reflection on what we can do differently to scale out. That time for reflection that we heard from our presenters, from Christy. We'll be reflecting back on these in day 3, when again we take a look at the arc and what we've accomplished from last year, and see if that inspires us to accomplish things next year. That I'm sure looks different for each one of us at each of our organizations. So the importance of putting your name in parentheses, because I'm sure that people will be reaching out to you and all of the good work that you've done. Tanya commissioned a first simple historical scan for Indigenous-led funds in Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders Nation, although she's not finished yet. We have policy apprenticeship programs. There were quite a few programs also from Track A. I'm really curious for you all to see everything that everyone's done. If you're done, you can also scroll down and see everything that your colleagues from Track A have written. It's quite a lot. Very inspiring. Someone even drew a little picture of something. All right. So that's looking good. With this mural will stay open. I'm going to actually send us all to break a little early. And if we come back at, let's see, at 50 or at 51 past the hour, we'll have a little extra time to see a little video from your Track A colleagues. So I'll send you all off to break. I'm going to stay here and break. If anyone has any mural questions, feel free to DM me on Zoom or ask it in the general Zoom chat. And I am more than happy to help with all mural things. Otherwise, we'll meet back here at 51 after the hour. And you can feel free to stay logged in, just shut off your video and audio, and we'll see you in a few minutes. Thanks, everyone.
fin todo lo tenía y a ti todo te lo entregaba. Tú por fin me necesitabas y después no me tuviste en cuenta. Tú por mí nunca trabajabas. Me acerqué para ser la primera. Si tú a mí nunca me querías, yo por qué tengo que darte pelas. Tú por mí nunca trabajabas. Me acerqué para ser la primera. Si tú a mí nunca me querías, yo por qué tengo que darte pelas. Y yo también miraba, yo adivinaba todo pues bien, también me iba bien, todo lo imaginé. Yo aquí sembré las semillas y regué las que tú plantabas. Tú sin mí nunca te hallabas, pero hoy me encuentro relajada. Lo que tú quisiste lo robaste, llegaste, pero de sorpresa. Déjame, nunca me quisiste, aléjate, me da pena ajena. Lo que tú quisiste lo robaste, llegaste, pero de sorpresa. Déjame, nunca me quisiste, aléjate, me da pena ajena. Yo también miraba, yo adivinaba todo pues bien, también me iba bien, todo lo imaginé. Yo también miraba, yo adivinaba todo pues bien, también me iba bien, todo lo imaginé. Yo te quería también, como instrumento de lo que yo podía hacer. Te adoraba también, desde el momento de lo que yo podía entender. Yo te miraba también, yo te miraba también, yo te boté, miraba también, yo te boté, miraba también, yo te miraba también, yo te miraba también, yo te boté, miraba también, yo te boté, miraba también. Yo también miraba, yo adivinaba, todo lo sé, también lo pude ver. Yo te quería también, como instrumento de lo que yo podía hacer. Te adoraba también, desde el momento de lo que yo podía entender. Te quería también, como instrumento de lo que yo podía hacer. Te adoraba también, desde el momento de lo que yo podía entender. Yo te boté, yo te boté, yo te boté, yo te boté. Yo te boté, yo te boté, yo te boté, yo te boté.
All right. Welcome back, everyone. As we trickle back in here, thank you for the music, IFIP team. I love that we have a playlist. I request the link to that playlist, please. So for those of you who are already back, the screen that I'm showing has a list of the breakouts, which we're now familiar with, but it also has 3 questions that we haven't seen before. And it's the questions that are going to guide our discussions in the breakouts. So take a look at those and see which one inspires you more and which conversation you wanna participate in. I'll wait until, perfect. All right. Okay. Welcome back, everyone. Hello, hello. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the 2 breakout sessions that will happen very shortly, and the 3 questions that are going to be guiding our conversations in those breakouts, which we co-designed with the IFIP team and the planning committee. So thanks to you all for being part of that. So I'll read them out here as we come back. So for breakout 1, which again has to do with COVID-19, or more specifically, the impact of COVID-19 and the response from Indigenous communities, learnings and reflections. The 3 questions are, what does just recovery or just transition look like from an Indigenous perspective in your and our regions? Then what are our solutions that already exist or that we would like to put forward? And finally, what do we need funders and philanthropy to do, to act on, right? Or what do we need to act on, right, as funders and as philanthropists? Then in breakout 2, this one deals with climate change. And as we heard from our colleague here about the COP, but more broadly climate change, so Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate change. The 3 questions here are, what lessons are we learning during this time? Jennifer already pointed us to a few. How can we individually and collectively respond in this moment? And finally, what are the potential ways there are to collaborate, support, and learn from each other? So these are the 3 questions that are going to be guiding us. I will leave this screen up for a little longer while I tell you about how these breakouts will work. And then we're going to hear from your Track A colleagues. So the breakouts are going to be 55 minutes long. You'll have a wonderful IFIP facilitator in each of your breakouts. And there's going to be a welcome, a brief silent exercise, and then the majority of the time is going to be a discussion, a collective discussion with you all. And finally, a closeout question. And then you'll come back to the group and you'll share back with us and with your Track A colleagues what you discussed in about 2 minutes. So what I also wanted to share is that each breakout group has their own Google Doc where we'll be in the participatory vein of this event, collectively note-taking, right? So here there are, this is the second breakout group, Indigenous rights and self-determination in this moment of climate urgency. We see the community agreements here. You're going to select one person of your group to present. And then here are your 3 questions for discussion. And perhaps most importantly, this is where you'll all be taking notes collectively. So you will be prompted by your facilitator to reflect individually at first on the first question, and then jot some notes down for about a minute, and then discuss And then you're going to move to the second question, jot some notes down individually, and discuss as a collective. And the same for the third question, right? So you'll each have that space. This is the Google Doc for Breakout 2. This is the Google Doc for Breakout 1. Your facilitators have these links, so don't worry about that. And before we have you all select to which breakout group you want to go to, I am going to invite the IFIP team, who has lined up the video for track A, to play back for us what the conversation sounded like in track A before we head out to our own breakout groups. So let me stop sharing here.
Hold on 1 minute.
Awesome, thanks, Rachel.
Sorry, I just have too many things open, so just bear with me for a moment.
Rachel is graciously doing a lot of the behind the scenes. So thank you to you for that.
Let's see how well I do it. Sorry, I seem to have lost my video. Please bear with me. Close.
All right. And I see also Chanda has put in the questions. If you guys want to refresh the questions that are going to be guiding us for the breakouts, they're in the Zoom chat. So start thinking about which breakout you want to go to, either breakout 1 for impact of COVID and response from Indigenous communities, or breakout 2 for Indigenous rights and self-determination at this moment of climate urgency.
I seem to have lost my video. Would it be possible to watch it afterward while I
We
try to
can do that. That's very possible. We're going to do exactly that. That was planned all along, as to not influence your discussions, you see? So Rachel, why don't we switch then to having them select the breakout groups?
Okay, I'm going to open them
All right,
now.
awesome.
If you are able to see and join a room, then please do so. If not, please just let Anka know which room you would like to join. I am going to be in room 2, so I am going to go there now.
Good luck, Rachel and Chanda, our facilitators. You guys are all going to have great sessions. So yes, those who can't see a possibility to enter a breakout room, let me know either in the chat or right now which room you would like to go to. Just mention your name and the breakout room and I'll send you there. I see here Sweet and Jennifer. Jennifer, am I right in assuming you would like to go to breakout 2?
Me 1, group 1, breakout
Okay,
1.
so let me, Jennifer is 2, Neil is group A. Christy, would you like to go to group 1? Am I right in assuming that? Yes, 1, yes. Thank you. Okay. And Teresa, will you be participating in the groups? Sí, no? Y Lourdes, I can stay. Feel free to go and join, and Winnie as well. Jennifer, were you not able to join the group? Ahí va.
Let me ask Teresa. Teresa, no sé si tú quieres. Oh, there's someone. Entrar a uno de los grupos